This is going to be a fairly quick tutorial just on sort of how the Ken Burns effect works in iMovie. If you aren't familiar with the concept of the Ken Burns effect by name, you've definitely seen it. It's become very common nowadays, but it was made popular by Ken Burns in some of his documentaries. Now, if we open iMovie, and not saying that iMovie is the absolute software that you should always be using, but it's very easy to work with the Ken Burns effect in iMovie. So, this is essentially what the current version of iMovie looks like. If you haven't created a project yet, you might have a splash screen that's showing the option to create a movie. You might have some other pop-up welcoming you to iMovie first before you see this. Just choose no theme. I mean, some of these, they're kind of neat to look at the first time or two you see them, but you see them a few times, you get bored of them. I'm going to go with no theme. I recommend no theme. Don't use the ones that everyone else is already using. So, Ken Burns, I'm just going to call it that. I have a series of photos here that I've already prepared, and you could use a Ken Burns effect with, like, live media with actual footage too, I suppose, if you wanted to, but it's primarily used for still imagery, and that's because still imagery isn't the most exciting to look at, and so by creating some movement in there, it helps them feel a little bit more interesting, a little bit more engaging for the user. There are other things you can do with it as well. So I have 6 images here that I've taken, and I'm just going to work with them as examples. If I drag them into the timeline, they'll automatically have a Ken Burns effect applied to them. Now, whether or not I want the Ken Burns effect applied to all of them, that's what it does by default. Now, I can make some modifications to this. So any one of these, I can go in, and of course, you can right-click and you see a series of options here, but maybe not exactly what we're looking for. If we click on a clip, and we go up here to this little crop button, not only can we choose to crop the actual image, but we can also adjust the Ken Burns effect. So if I wanted to, I could have it maybe start on the city here, and then it zooms out to a wider shot. And if I just click out, now you can see that that is taking effect. Now, if I don't want the Ken Burns effect, I can also go into here and I can tell it that instead of having this selected, I can choose to fit or crop to fill or whatever I want there. So I don't have to make every single one of them use the Ken Burns effects. And if I accidentally choose the wrong one, like maybe I want it to start here and then slowly show more of the lizard, but I accidentally chose this as the end and this is the start, I could just reposition them, but I can also just click this little thing here to flip them, and now they flip. So there you go. You see the little lizard head, and the camera slowly moves over to it. I could tell this one maybe fits, and we could have this maybe slowly reveal the dragonfly. And you can use Ken Burns for different reasons. You know, part of it is just to add some camera movement and make it look more interesting, but you can also have it slowly reveal the image. So if the viewer starts with this, they may not know exactly what they're looking at, and that could create a little bit of intrigue. And as the camera begins to move across the image, then they get more information and they see that, oh, it's a dragonfly. Same thing here. You see a goose, and you're like, oh, goose. I like geese. Geese are cool. And as the camera moves down, you say, oh, goose, what are you doing? Don't eat the garbage? That's terrible, right? So you can use it in different ways, too. You can use it to both hide, but also reveal information as the camera is moving across the image. And here's another example. We could do that with this as well. If we wanted to show the explosion here, make the viewer a little unsure of what's happening, we could just show the explosion to start. And then through a Ken Burns effect, we could zoom out maybe a little bit to start capturing more of the frame, as well as pan over and reveal what happened. You know, it didn't just explode, it was destroyed through war or whatnot. And this is a pretty famous image by Liechtenstein. Now, this is as big as this one is available because this is a pretty recent image, only 1963, so it's still protected by copyright. But there are older images too, like this 1775 painting, which is public domain due to its age, and we could get a really huge image of this if we wanted to. Well, a pretty huge image of it. and we could drop that in. And if we wanted to, we could go into the Ken Burns effect. Let me make this a little bit bigger just so we can see more what's in the picture, since it's a little bit more of a complex image. And we could decide where we want it to start and end. So maybe we want it to start here. And so you'd hopefully, so the viewer probably focuses more on these guys here, and as they're looking at these, they might start to look over here, at which we could also have the camera begin to pan across and zoom out a little bit, so that way you see what they're looking at, which is the death of General Montgomery at the Battle of Quebec. So how you use that is up to you. Now, the speed might be a little too fast. 4 seconds for that much movement might be a little intense. I might want to go in here and just extend the length of this clip, so that way it goes a little bit slower as it reveals. And if I want to be extremely exact, instead of just dragging, I can click the little information here, and I could say that I don't want it to be 10.2, I want it to be exactly 10 seconds. So you can do that up in the information panel as well. Now, if you look at some of the work by Ken Burns himself, it isn't always just a single pan. Sometimes you will have, especially in a more complex image, where he moves from one spot to another and then to another spot. You have to be a little bit more clever. So if we want it to go from here to something else, like let's say we want it to go from there to kind of more up here, maybe to kind of see the flags, and then maybe we want it to move down to the death of General Montgomery, we would probably need to be a little bit more creative. Now, I don't really quite like the composition there, so maybe I'll modify that a little bit more, focus in a little bit. Maybe kind of around there. Then what I can do is I can copy and paste, so just Command-C, Command-V. I've copied and pasted that whole clip. Now I can go and click on this chunk of the clip. Now it's the same thing, it jumps, which we don't want, but I can go back into Ken Burns, I can swap. So now this is the start, it matches exactly where the previous end was, and I could go in here and change the ending to have the death of General Montgomery in here now. So it'll go from here to there in that first chunk, and then from here down. So if we just want to test that out, and it's a little long, 10 seconds might be too long, but you can play with it as you see fit. That might have been a little too revealing of the death there. Maybe I want to move the camera angles around a little bit, because it kind of revealed what was going on before I was ready to. But then you get the whole gravity of the situation, hopefully. Now, if you want it to pause in between, it's not going to pause. It's just going to jump from one to the next. There is a little bit of gradual start and stop. It kind of eases into it. But if I want an actual pause, I would need to once again probably copy the clip, drag it over to the edge of this clip, so hopefully I don't end up dissecting it. Paste it in. So now I've got this repeated. Go to this here and tell it that I no longer want Ken Burns. Now the issue is going to be, oops, so to see what happened, it got rid of the wrong one. It started at the start. So if I flip it, now if I tell it crop, there we go. So now it will stop there for however long I choose. 10 seconds is going to be way too long. But if I click on the little eye, I can now switch here, and maybe I just want it to stop here for like 2 seconds. And now if we play it, it goes across. You're still seeing too much of him, but I don't want to deal with that now. I would tweak it on my own. It stops, and then it starts again to move back to the whole thing. So you can create multiple pans through iMovie, but you have to be a little creative in how you do it. Now, the other thing that can happen sometimes too is I'll see people want to make like a stop motion or something, and that's where you have like you're shooting a film, but you're doing it with like little animated figures, right? So, or I guess it doesn't have to be animated figures. It could be anything really. You could actually use people for stop motion and just little shifts one at a time, or any object really. But it's where you're you're taking like picture after picture after picture of an object, just slightly moved. And so instead of inserting film into iMovie or whatever software, you're inserting a bajillion photos that like one after the other after the other after the other, and when they're all crammed together, each one being like a fraction of a second each, it creates the illusion of movement. Now the problem with that is, when you drag the photos into iMovie, it's automatically creating this Ken Burns effect. So how do you deal with that? Well, you can go in and tell each and every one not to be a Ken Burns effect, but that's time consuming and it's probably going to cause your images to jump around because you might not have them exact. Instead, what you want to do is, before you add in any images whatsoever, you need to go into your preferences and put in here that your photo placement is going to be cropped to fill or fit, whichever you feel is appropriate. And then you can even put in here how long you want the clips to play, so that way you're not having to modify each individual picture. You just say, hey, like I want each one to only show for, I think 0.1 is the shortest in iMovie. If you want shorter than 0.1 seconds each, you're going to have to use a more sophisticated software. But you could still do it in iMovie and get the general idea of a stop motion across, even if the duration is too long. Now, I suppose what you could also do if you wanted to, you could create your iMovie at 0.1 per frame, export it, re-import it, speed it up, and I guess that would sort of work, but, you know, it's a little roundabout. So anyway, there's Ken Burns, how Ken Burns works in iMovie, how to modify Ken Burns, how to create multiple panning effects in one image, and how to just tell Ken Burns to stop altogether.